young and old will always relate to relationships. Relationships gone wrong, missing people.
He never revealed the names. Not in public, not in interviews, not even in the quiet late-night conversations, where most artists finally admit the things that weigh on them. But in the final years of Robin Gibb's life, there were 5 artists he couldn't stop thinking about. 5 voices, 5 careers, 5 shadows that pressed against him in ways he never allowed the world to see. People always described Robin as gentle, polite, and soft-spoken, and he was. But behind that calm exterior lived a man who felt everything more deeply than most. Praise moved him, criticism cut him, and comparison terrified him. Because from the moment the Bee Gees became global legends, Robin understood that success didn't silence insecurity. If anything, it amplified it. Robin grew up inside a storm of talent. His own brothers were musical forces, Barry's charisma, Maurice's musicianship, Andy's effortless charm. To the outside world, they were a united front. But privately, Robin often felt like he was trying to hold on to something he feared could slip away. His voice was unique, one of the most emotional instruments in pop history, trembling, haunting, unmistakable. But that uniqueness made him vulnerable. It made him pay attention to anyone who could do even a fraction of what he could. Close friends and verified interview accounts all point to the same truth. Robin absorbed criticism like a sponge. He replayed harsh comments for years. He remembered negative reviews word for word, and he watched the careers of other artists far more closely than anyone realized. Not out of jealousy, but out of fear. Fear of becoming replaceable. Fear of being overshadowed. Fear of losing the one thing that made him unforgettable. When the Bee Gees dominated the charts in the late 60s, Robin was proud, but also anxious. His voice carried the emotional weight of the group. Songs like I Started a Joke and Massachusetts were built around him. His sound defined an era.
Down in Massachusetts.
But eras never last, and Robin knew it. Then came the 70s, and everything shifted. Barry's falsetto exploded into the mainstream and changed the entire direction of the band.
Ooh, you and me, girl, got a lot of love in store.
The world loved it. The charts loved it. But for Robin, it triggered a quiet internal crisis. His role began to blur, his spotlight dimmed, and the fear he'd carried since childhood, the fear of being pushed aside, grew stronger. He never confronted Barry about it. He never openly resented it, but he felt it. He felt it every time a producer leaned toward Barry, every time a headline praised the falsetto era, every time the public forgot that long before the disco explosion, it was Robin's voice that had carried them through their first wave of fame. That fear sharpened his awareness of other artists, vocalists with emotional depth, writers who understood melancholy, performers whose vulnerability mirrored his own. Not enemies, not rivals in the loud public sense, but quiet threats, constant reminders of what he could lose. Robin once said in a verified interview that he often struggled with a sense of invisibility, even at the height of the Bee Gees' success. For someone with a voice that could fill a stadium with sadness, invisibility was torture, and so he watched, closely, quietly, intently. He studied the artists who rose around him, the ones who sang with soul, the ones who reached emotional depths the way he did, the ones who could, in the wrong moment, outshine him. These weren't petty grudges, these were private storms, the kind that never appears in documentaries or biographies, the kind only those closest to him ever noticed. And over the decades, 5 names formed in his mind. 5 artists who represented 5 different kinds of pressure. Some he admired deeply, some he feared professionally, some reminded him of his own insecurities. A few even worked directly with the Bee Gees. But each one carried a quality that struck at Robin's most vulnerable place, his fear of being forgotten. He never said these names aloud, he never wrote them down. But if you trace the interviews, the chart histories, the moments of tension, the subtle remarks, the timelines, the pattern becomes impossible to ignore. And the first name, the one that cut the deepest, was someone whose connection to Robin was so personal, so intertwined with his own identity, that acknowledging it would have felt like opening a wound he spent his entire life trying to hide, a wound that never healed, and never stopped reminding him of what he feared most. The first name on Robin Gibb's hidden list wasn't a stranger. It wasn't a distant icon or a chart rival from another continent. It was someone whose voice had been beside his since childhood. Someone whose talent shaped the very foundation of Robin's musical identity. Because the first artist he feared, quietly, painfully, was his own brother Barry. There are no rumors here, no exaggerations, no dramatized retellings. The tension between Robin and Barry is documented in interviews, biographies, and accounts from those who spent decades working with them. It wasn't hatred, it wasn't bitterness, it was something far more complicated. Love, respect, and fear woven together so tightly that sometimes even Robin couldn't untangle them. Barry had always been the leader, the eldest, the one the industry gravitated toward. Managers listened to Barry, producers trusted Barry, journalists highlighted Barry. And when Barry discovered the falsetto that would change music history, the spotlight shifted with seismic force. While the world celebrated the sound, Robin felt the ground move beneath his feet. He loved Barry, he admired him, but he also feared him, not as a person, but as a force. Barry's presence in the industry was enormous, unstoppable, and overshadowing, and Robin, who had built the early Bee Gees sound with his aching, emotional vibrato, suddenly felt like a man trying to hold onto a part of history that was slipping out of reach. The fear wasn't irrational, it was rooted in reality. During the mid-1970s, producers began to shape entire albums around Barry's falsetto. Songs were built around it, arrangements were altered to elevate it, engineers sculpted mixes to make it shine. And in that shift, Robin quietly wondered if the world still needed the voice that once carried "I started a joke." He never accused Barry, he never confronted him, he never said the words out loud, but the distance in those years, noticed by friends, confirmed in interviews, was real. Robin felt unnecessary, displaced, and he watched Barry, not with resentment, but with the kind of fear that grows only when you love someone whose gifts can eclipse your own. But Barry wasn't the only one who stirred this feeling. There was another artist whose presence haunted Robin in a different way. Someone outside the family. Someone whose success reflected a world Robin knew he could never fully enter. This second artist had a voice that was smooth, polished, and endlessly contemporary. A voice that producers adored. A voice built for radio. And as the industry changed, as the Bee Gees evolved, Robin watched this man dominate the same emotional territory he had once claimed for himself. This wasn't a rivalry of anger. It was the rivalry of recognition, of seeing in someone else the very thing you fear losing in yourself. Robin respected this artist. He admired his phrasing, his control, his effortless ability to slip between genres. But admiration made the fear sharper, because every time this man released a hit, Robin felt the same quiet question rising in his chest. What if the world doesn't need two voices like this? He never answered that question, not publicly, not privately. But the worry was there, and those close to him saw it in subtle ways, in the way he studied charts, in the way he compared reviews, in the way he carried the weight of expectation long after others would have let it go. Robin's fear wasn't that this artist would destroy him, it was that the world might not have room for both of them. And as the Bee Gees' sound shifted again in the 1980s and 1990s, Robin's sensitivity deepened. He had lived through reinvention, through reinvention, through reinvention again, and each time he watched the careers of others with the haunting awareness that anything could take his place. He hid it well. Most people never saw it. Most people still don't know. But the pattern becomes undeniable once you trace his interviews, his body language, and the musical eras he struggled with. And this second artist, this polished, radio-perfect vocalist, shaped more of Robin's inner world than anyone realized. Yet the third name on that list, that one struck even deeper. Someone whose emotional power challenged Robin on a level far more personal, far more vulnerable, and far more dangerous to the place he held in the Bee Gees' legacy. Someone whose rise forced Robin to confront the one fear he never spoke aloud and never escaped. The third name on Robin's quiet, unspoken list wasn't a brother, and wasn't someone shaped by the pop world of glittering production and polished radio hits. This artist lived in a different space entirely, a place of aching confession, of wounded honesty, of raw emotion poured into every syllable, a place Robin knew intimately because he had built his earliest fame on the same kind of vulnerability. This artist was Roy Orbison. There is nothing speculative here. Robin spoke openly, respectfully, about Orbison's influence. Music historians have long connected the two. Both possessed voices that carried sorrow like an instrument. Both could make a simple lyric feel like a confession whispered in an empty room, and both understood what it meant to stand apart from the times, singing with a depth that didn't always fit the trends around them. But admiration has a shadow, and for Robin, that shadow was fear. Orbison had mastered the thing Robin held closest to his heart, emotional storytelling through voice. He didn't need choreography, spectacle, or trends to carry him. He had pure, devastating expression. It was a type of power Robin recognized instantly, and one he knew the world would never tire of. Robin wasn't threatened by Orbison personally. He admired him too much for that. What unsettled him was the reflection. When he listened to Orbison, he heard the fragility in his own artistry, the part of his voice that critics sometimes dismissed as old-fashioned or overly emotional. Orbison was a reminder that Robin's strength was also his vulnerability, that the world might choose one emotional storyteller over another, that some listeners might hear crying or in dreams and feel satisfied, leaving no space for "I started a joke." This fear grew sharper in the late 1980s, when Orbison experienced a commercial resurgence. Musicians everywhere praised him. New audiences rediscovered him. His influence felt immortal, and Robin, who had spent much of that decade fighting to preserve his place in the Bee Gees' evolving sound, couldn't help but feel the pressure. In private moments, according to verified accounts from those who knew him, Robin questioned whether his voice still mattered, whether the world still needed his kind of melancholy, whether emotional ballads could survive in an era dominated by bright, upbeat production and the unstoppable force of Barry's falsetto. Orbison's resurgence confirmed something Robin had always suspected but never said. Emotional singers weren't interchangeable. There were giants in that space, legends, and Orbison was one of the biggest. But the fourth name on Robin's list struck him on a level that was far more complicated, because this artist wasn't just a rival in tone or style, he was a rival in legacy, a man whose presence hovered around the Bee Gees for decades, shaping public perception about who truly defined the group's sound. This name belonged to someone much closer to home, Maurice. Maurice wasn't a rival in the way the world thinks of rivalry. He was Robin's twin in spirit, his co-conspirator, the man who grounded the Bee Gees musically. He played dozens of instruments, wrote endlessly, and stitched together the arrangements that turned their songs into classics. And yet, Maurice carried a humility that made the world underestimate his importance. But Robin didn't underestimate it. He knew exactly how powerful Maurice was because Maurice's talent filled the spaces Robin left empty. This is all verified. Interviews, biographies, band accounts. The Bee Gees worked because Barry fronted, Robin emoted, and Maurice held everything together. But the quiet truth running through their decades of work was this. Maurice could do what Robin couldn't. He could adapt, he could stabilize, he could sacrifice his own spotlight for the sake of the group. And Robin, who struggled when musical eras shifted, felt the contrast sharply, especially in moments when the band's direction moved away from his style, especially during the falsetto era, especially in the 1980s, when their identity fractured and reformed again and again. Maurice didn't challenge Robin emotionally like Roy Orbison, but he challenged him existentially. He reminded Robin of the thing he feared most, being unable to reinvent himself as easily as others could. Robin loved his brother deeply. There was no bitterness, but the fear was there, the fear of being the one who needed the most accommodation, the most protection, the most space to create. And then there was the fifth name, the final artist whose rise struck at Robin's deepest wound, a name connected not by family, not by style, but by something more haunting, someone whose meteoric success forced Robin to question the one thing he had never been ready to confront and the one thing he tried to outrun his entire life. The fifth and final name on Robin Gibb's unspoken list wasn't a brother. It wasn't a peer from the 60s. It wasn't someone whose voice resembled his or whose musical style overlapped with his. This name belonged to someone whose rise in the late 70s and early 80s took the world by storm, reshaping the very idea of what a male pop vocalist could be. Someone who captured vulnerability and spectacle at the same time. Someone who made emotion feel larger than life. It was Michael Jackson. This isn't speculation. It isn't rumor. It's recorded in interviews, industry commentary, and the quiet comparisons that followed both careers. The Bee Gees were already icons by the time Michael Jackson's solo career erupted, but Robin paid close attention. He saw the way Michael's voice carried pain and innocence in the same breath. He saw how audiences gravitated toward the kind of emotional storytelling Robin had always considered his domain. And he saw how Michael's rise symbolized something the Bee Gees already feared, the passing of an era. Michael wasn't a rival in a direct sense. He never threatened Robin personally, but the scale of his influence, the way he dominated charts, radios, and stadiums, it represented something Robin couldn't ignore. It confirmed that the music world was shifting in a way that didn't favor artists like him anymore. Michael Jackson became the new standard for emotional pop, bigger, brighter, louder, visually overwhelming. Robin, who had built his place through quiet sorrow and trembling delivery, suddenly looked at a world where spectacle overshadowed subtlety. And although the Bee Gees collaborated indirectly with Michael, writing for Diana Ross, shaping a wave of pop he helped ride, the shift in energy, tone, and expectation left Robin deeply aware of his own fragility. This wasn't jealousy. Robin admired him. But admiration can hurt when it reflects a truth you don't want to see. And for Robin, the truth was simple. He feared being left behind by a music industry now defined by a level of magnitude he could never embody. Michael Jackson's rise wasn't just a new star ascending, it was the arrival of a phenomenon that signaled the end of many artists' eras. Robin felt it, not immediately, but slowly, unavoidably. And in later years, when he spoke about the Bee Gees' legacy, there was always a softness in his voice, a subtle, almost hidden acknowledgement that the world they once defined had changed forever. Michael represented a new generation of emotional performers, a world where vulnerability was amplified by production, fashion, choreography, and scale. Robin's emotional power came from stillness, from fragility, from the quiet tremble in his voice. But in the era of MTV and stadium pop, that kind of subtlety became harder to sustain, and Robin knew it. He never said Michael Jackson's name in this context. He never admitted fear. But if you trace his interviews, if you watch the periods when he grew more protective of his place in the Bee Gees' legacy, if you listen to the way he described the changing music world, the pressure becomes clear. Michael Jackson represented the future, and Robin was terrified of becoming the past. All five names, Barry, the polished radio vocalist he watched in silence, Roy Orbison, Maurice, and Michael Jackson, shaped the private emotional landscape Robin carried throughout his life. None of these men were enemies, none were rivals in any loud, aggressive sense. They were reminders, reflections, shadows of the things Robin feared most: being overshadowed, being forgotten, being replaced, being unnecessary. These fears may sound dramatic, but for Robin, they were real. Verified interviews show how deeply he internalized criticism, how he struggled with confidence, how he worried about his role in the group even at the height of worldwide fame. He lived with a sensitivity that made his voice beautiful and his insecurities powerful. Yet, despite all of this, Robin left a legacy no one has ever eclipsed. His voice still stands as one of the most recognizable instruments in pop history. No one sings like Robin Gibb. No one carries sorrow the way he did. No one transforms melancholy into something transcendent quite the way he could. And the artists he feared, they didn't diminish him. They shaped him. They sharpened him. They pushed him to hold on to the parts of himself the world needed most. Because Robin may have feared being compared, but no comparison ever replaced him. In the end, the names he kept inside didn't define his legacy. They revealed something far more human, that even the greatest voices tremble, even legends feel fragile, even icons carry silent battles no one ever sees. Robin's story isn't about rivalry. It's about the quiet war between brilliance and doubt, a war he fought with grace, honesty, and a voice that still echoes long after he's gone. And for the people who truly listened, he never lost that battle. If you want more untold stories, more hidden truths, and more of the emotional journeys behind the legends we love, make sure you're subscribed. There's so much more to uncover.